Hello, I am back on Sunday, February 8th, to talk about what I read this week. I read mostly comics, but I finished off a book that I've been working on for a while, which was really exciting, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The novel that I'm reading right now, which is my project, which is why I have not been reading a ton of prose other than comics right now, is Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, which I'm like just over halfway through, but it's taking me a long time. And I'm also reading this thing, Catwoman of East End Omnibus by Ed Brubaker and Darwin Cook right now. So those are like the two things taking up a lot of mental space and reading time. But I do have stuff to talk about that is really fun and exciting, including my little piece of glitter right here, including some really cool comics. The first thing that I read is Evan Dahm's Vattu, book one. Evan Dahm, prolific, very critically acclaimed webcomic cartoonist, creator of Rice Boy, among other things. All of his work can be read for free online, but people are finally printing it. I think mostly Iron Circus is printing his work. Vattu, I think if you like Bone, you'll like Vattu, Jeff Smith's Bone. It's sort of anti-colonial, anti-imperial story about the ways that our concepts of space and land and identity and sort of the sovereignty of the self or the independence of the self change when they come into contact with empire and the machine of empire. Really interesting stuff. Beautiful cartooning. Not super wordy, because I think Dahm really lets you kind of sit in the environment that he's creating. But really excellent cartooning, really beautiful. The next thing is I finished off all of Ms. Marvel earlier this week, which I want to make a whole video about, kind of talking about it. I do think the G. Willow Wilson Ms. Marvel stuff is the best stuff that's out so far. Now that I've read all of it, that's like the best written and it has the best art. But I think the second best is the next run, which is Saladin Ahmed's run. I'm not a big Ahmed fan because I was introduced to his work via his current run, current until a few months ago, on Daredevil, which I thought was like some of the worst comics I read last year, which just bummed me out and annoyed me to no end. But I think his writing style suits Kamala Khan and Ms. Marvel a lot better. The art's pretty solid generally, and the storytelling is interesting for the most part, although I think it loses some of its kind of like down-to-earth neighborhood hero-y kind of thing for the first, maybe third of the book, which is kind of a bummer, just because I think that's like where she's the most compelling to me. It's very kind of like Spider-Man goes to space sort of feeling, but he manages to keep it kind of about family still, which is nice. But yeah, I would say both the art and the storytelling take a hit after G. Willow Wilson and Adrian Alphona come off the book, and then the artists who come after Alphona leaves the series on Wilson's run, are consistently really excellent and also consistently kind of pushing boundaries creatively. And I say that with Marvel in mind. So they're not pushing boundaries in terms of like all comics, but they're pushing boundaries in terms of Marvel comics, especially Marvel comics that you might pick up off the shelf now, because there's really very little experimentation happening now. But I do think a lot of that kind of boundary pushing stops being the case, stops being present in the work of Ahmed. The next piece of the run is, I think, I think it's Samira Ahmed's run is next. She just has one volume. It's called Ms. Marvel Beyond the Limit. It's fine. The art and color work is like consistently solid. It's Andres Genole and Triona Farrell are doing the art and coloring. And it's the kind of art and coloring that's like consistently solid in a way that I think a lot of Marvel comics now aren't. So it is still kind of refreshing to like open a book and think, wow, that like looks just good on each page, you know. But it's not mind blowing. I think this is one of the weaker moments of writing in the series for sure. But there's still kind of compelling character work going on. I kind of wish she'd been given more time on the series, because the story here feels like she had lots of ideas and she was given like 6 issues to work them in. And the kind of fleshing out of the antagonist is not great. Her motivations feel pretty forced and difficult to understand, which really bugs me, especially for like a ground level superhero story, especially coming off of, I think, both Wilson and Ahmed's run, where there was a real attention to character motivations, from both the like really wacky Silver Age end of the spectrum to like a pretty serious, mature end of the spectrum of villains, because they deal with everything from like a really excellent Shocker storyline to like why we fall into fascism as individuals, and why like fascist and authoritarian and xenophobic rhetoric works on people who feel alienated from society. And this, it's kind of a multiversal story maybe, and the villain's motivations in the end are sort of revealed to be solely based on like a really dumb misunderstanding, and it's just, it falls a little flat. I would say like this is not, unless you're like weird like me and you're like, I want to read all of Ms. Marvel, this is not something that you have to read, especially if you're choosing between like the Saladin, Ahmed, the Wilson, or this at your local comic shop. Kind of same thing with the next book, which is Ms. Marvel Fists of Justice by Jody Hauser. This is kind of like the Ms. Marvel equivalent of like Marvel Team Up, or like the Spectacular Spider-Man issues where each issue is like a Spider-Man team up with a different character. In this, it's a few different team ups. It's kind of like early Krakoan age, I think, is when this was published. But before she's revealed to be a mutant. So she teams up with Moon Knight in one issue, Wolverine in another, and then several of the X-Men and Venom. And they're all being kind of like confronted or hunted by these like nanobots that are trying to get DNA samples from them for an unknown reason. And it's kind of like a detective story, and she's teaming up with each of these characters, kind of like learning from them how to like solve mysteries and stuff, and it's fine. It's better than the Samira Ahmed stuff, but it's not particularly engaging. The next and last run is I don't have it on my pile over here. Is Ms. Marvel New Mutant. I think I think they're better than the Samira Ahmed and the Hauser stuff. Um, but I think they fall into the sort of like big two event trap, which is um you really have to know what's going on with um Krakoan Age and then like Fall of the House of M or whatever events to like really understand what's happening in Ms. Marvel, which I think really irks me because Ms. Marvel should be a little bit like Amazing Spider-Man or something. Like you should be able to just pick up on a run or pick up an issue and like not need to know what's going on in like 6 or 7 other titles to understand what's happening. And it's kind of a bummer because there is a lot of really interesting character work going into this series. Like there's a really fun juxtaposition of the cynicism of X-Men, of like members of the X-Men team who are in hiding and in like really intense persecution and like literally living in the sewers, and then Ms. Marvel, who is still living a double life with a secret identity and gets to have this like happy family on one hand in Jersey City, and then on the other hand is living with this found family of the X-Men who are really cynical and dark and have kind of lost all hope for the future of mutant kind in the world, and she's trying to reconcile these two things. And then I think a better writer would have also kind of incorporated like what it means to be a woman of color and a Muslim woman in the United States, but that doesn't really come up either because Marvel editorial like didn't want to get into that, or the writers just weren't interested in writing about that. But there's an interesting sort of internal character conflict that is like slightly explored, but gets really lost in the milieu of like rise and fall of the House of X nonsense, you know, and kind of like knowing all of the Hickman X-Men era lore. And I think if you don't know that lore, and I don't really know that lore, although that's something that I'm starting to read right now, it just takes away a lot from your enjoyment of the experience, and it feels disorienting. Um, the next thing I read was Miles Morales Spider-Man by Cody Ziglar. This is the current Miles Morales Spider-Man run, but these are just the first 2 volumes of it. Ziglar is currently writing it, so if you go in and pick up the newest Miles Morales issue, Ziglar's writing that. Ziglar's pretty prolific comic and TV writer. He's got credits on like Robot Chicken, Rick and Morty, Futurama, so like lots of kind of big name comedy cartoons of kind of like the golden age Adult Swim era, and like sort of that late golden age of Cartoon Network era. Ziglar, queer black man, is writing Miles Morales, which is I think a really well needed perspective on the character as a kind of working class black character on the Marvel roster, made by Brian Michael Bendis, a very sort of straight white guy. I think it's a good run so far. I've only read the first 2 volumes, but I am going to keep reading it. I really like Miles Morales. I'm a huge fan of the character. That's another run that is critically acclaimed from Saladin Ahmed, which I haven't read yet. And it's nice that they're actually having their characters of color written by people of color. And I think it does show there's like a care for the character that is reassuring, especially as Marvel and DC both feel like they're trending towards a kind of liberal conservatism or conservatism. Um, the art's really solid, although at times it's kind of jumbled. I think Marvel has to kind of tighten up the ship on simplifying their art a little bit, bringing it back to the basics, just because I've noticed a lot of Marvel layouts being really jumbled. There's like a lot of difficulty with Marvel art right now, um, in the distinctions between foreground and background, even. And that's kind of present, I think, in this Miles Morales run. But the writing is fun, and I think it's clear that Ziglar's working with a long run in mind. And there's interesting characterization work. I think the trap that people occasionally fall into with Miles is um, writing him like Peter Parker, because there are similarities, of course, between the two characters, and I think there's notable similarities between the two in this run, but it doesn't feel like Ziegler's just like writing a second Peter Parker, which is really good. And there's some fun stuff involved in this run too, like Miles teams up with Misty Knight to solve a mystery that is going to get either continued or resolved in the next volume, which I'm excited to read. Stuff like that, where it's like characters you don't normally get to see are being brought in, which I think is really fun, especially because I love the kind of detective-y mystery elements of street level superhero teams, which I think the MCU has caused a lot of comics to lose, um, which I also think was something that felt wrong with Ahmed's Daredevil, and I think it's been fun watching. It was fun reading Miles trying to figure out a mystery while also sort of dealing with the accumulated trauma of being Spider-Man and like having your life and the lives of your friends be in danger constantly. And there's like a real engagement with the emotional field of the character. The next thing I read, which I've been wanting to read for a while, and I thought it was 2 volumes, but it's just 2 editions of the same volume. And there is a second volume by Marjorie Liu, which I'm going to read next. Marjorie Liu of Monstrous fame, most notably. But I thought there were 2 volumes of the Casada, but there's just 2 editions. This was... When was this published? This is NYX, or NYX, NYX Wannabe. This was published in like the early 2010s, so these volumes were published first in 2011, so the issues are probably coming out 2010 to 2011, and they feel like a Marvel from days gone by. Like, Marvel's not doing this stuff anymore. The art is so of its era, but in the best way possible. It feels a lot like Alfona's work with Brian K. Vaughan on Runaways, is what I would describe it as. And I think Joshua Middleton might have done some work on the Runaways too. Joshua Middleton. Yeah, so Joshua Middleton did a couple issues of Runaways. Middleton's the interior artist for NYX. It's another kind of street level Marvel team. I don't even know that I would describe them as a team, but it's pretty dark, I would say, which I think in interviews I've heard is what drew Marjorie Liu to the characters. It's got X-23 in it and a couple other mutants. And it's kind of, I think the kind of selling point one-liner is it's X-23's life on the streets. And it's kind of like a gutter punk story of 3 girls who develop mutant powers in very different circumstances, all of whom have kind of really awful lives. X-23 is doing SEX work, and one of the other girls I think lives in a somewhat abusive household, um, and then maybe both of them do. Anyway, they all run away basically from their life and they live on the street. And it's really grimy and grungy, and it's really excellent. Pretty dark comics. I would recommend this for anyone who's looking for just like a good self-contained little story. Like if you're just kind of like walking into the comic shop thinking like I want something that doesn't feel like a time investment. I just want to be able to like sit down in a chair for a day, like an afternoon or whatever, and just like read a story. I think this is a really good choice for you. One of my favorite Marvel comics that I've read. This really makes me kind of yearn for Marvel that was, which is both silly but also real. Yeah, I really liked it. I think it's one of the rare X titles that you don't need to know anything about the X-Men to enjoy and read, because I'm pretty X-Men ignorant and I really enjoyed it. So, highly recommend. The last comic that I read, this was the best comic I read this week, by far. This is David Wojnarowicz and James Romberger's 7 Miles a Second. David Wojnarowicz, kind of seminal gay artist, activist, writer. Wojnarowicz died in the process of making this work of AIDS. He wrote really extensively about the experience of being ill with AIDS, about the experience of being a sex worker in New York as a young adult and child. He's got several really incredible short story collections, including one that I read earlier this year called Memories That Smell Like Gasoline, which is really incredible. He's also a painter and a photographer and kind of an all-around performance artist. Really, really incredible. And this work is it is complete. I think Romberger and Marguerite Van Cook, who's the other artist credited on it, finished the project after he died, and the last half borrows heavily from a couple stories in Memories That Smell Like Gasoline, but they're very much still their own work. I think it's being reprinted now. It was originally printed by Vertigo Comics, and now I think is being reprinted by Ground Zero. The book itself is about Wojnarowicz's experience as a sex worker, and then later his experience as an artist as he's kind of coming to grips with his death. And he writes really beautifully and heart-wrenchingly about how AIDS changes your experience with the world, and your experience of the self and the individual. The art in it is also incredible. It's really colorful and really surreal, and it really moves in and out of dream in a way that I think is really fascinating. I'm going to work on a paper for my Substack about this book, because there's a lot going on in it. And there's a lot to say that I don't really think I can get into in this kind of free-form video format. But he's doing a lot of experimentation that's really, really influential and key to a lot of queer work that comes after it, queer comics that come after it, but also work that is contemporary to it. And I think if this doesn't make it on my list of like top 10 or 20 comics that I read this year, um, I'll be really happy because it means that I've read uh, 20 mind-blowingly incredible comics without any expectation right now of having done that. This is like 5 stars out of 5, 10 stars out of 10. All the stars in the sky for me. This was incredible. If you can get your hands on a copy, really recommend it. It is in print right now, but I don't know for how long. And then the last book that I read that I finished last night while working is Cruising Utopia by José Esteban Muñoz. Muñoz, an incredibly influential, really important figure in queer theory and affect theory and performance theory. Not just a queer theorist, but I think also kind of a queer art historian and critic. I think this is this work is seminal if you're looking to write about queer art and queer art practices and queer culture. It's really accessible because each chapter is very much about uh, a piece of art or a piece of literature or a performance. So there's really kind of like tangible things that anchor each chapter. And in many ways, this is as much a work of art history and critique as it is a work of cultural criticism or theory in a way that I think is really important to acknowledge. um, I finished that right after reading 7 Miles a Second, and it really had me thinking about 7 Miles a lot more deeply. I think if you're interested in reading just a book that will really broaden the way that you engage with queer art, this is a great book for you. I find myself thinking about it constantly. Whenever I'm reading something, it's kind of like in the realm of Mark Fisher's Eerie and the Weird, where it's like a book of theory and criticism that I read, and then whenever I engage with something else, it's like popping into my mind constantly. I'm like, that's just like what Munoz was saying in blah 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 chapter of Cruising Utopia. I'm gonna read Disidentifications next, which is another work on kind of affect theory and queer art by queer artists of color, which I'm really excited about reading. Um, the main criticism that a lot of people have about this book is that it feels very gay male, and it does feel very distinctly gay in the sense that it's the male presence is very felt in the book. That being said, it's not necessarily it's not in like a misogynistic way or a trans exclusionary way. You're just very aware that you're reading a text by a gay man, but I think that's not like necessarily a bad thing. If you're looking for like trans theory or something, like this is not the text for you. He does write a fair amount about lesbian artists, but for the most part, the artists and performers that he's writing about are men. Um, and a lot of the experiences feel uh, distinctly gay male. He writes a lot about cruising in a way that feels very male. He writes a lot about sort of drag in a way that feels quite male. He writes a lot about like gay male bars as well. But I think what he's writing about theoretically is applicable to all queer art. It's just that he's really interested in gay male art, so that's what he's writing about. And he can speak to the gay male experience, so that's what he's writing about. Um, but I think if you're looking to read a work of queer theory that's accessible, this is a really, really good starting point. Um, because of how anchored it is in um, tangible material art. Um, that being said, it took me a while to read this, but normally books of theory take me a while to read because I tend to read them piecemeal, and this is a really good book to read that way, because each chapter is about a distinct work of art or a distinct artist, so you can read it like a collection rather than a whole text all at once. Um, yeah, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I shelved this at City Lights yesterday, and I was like all happy that we had it back in stock because it's just so excellent. And that's it for what I read this week. I'll be back next Sunday. Bye.